first speaker, Mark Broadmeadow, who's coming from the Forestry Commission, to talk about where can we model, how can we model where to plant government's woodland creation aspirations.
Quite possibly more talking about the challenges of modelling where to put the woodland rather than giving you any solutions. Maybe you can provide the solutions. But it's worthwhile just setting out what the challenges are. The Clean Growth Strategy and the 25-year Environment Plan set out some challenging tree planting aspirations. Maybe 2060, 12% woodland cover, 130,000 hectares by 2032. So either way, they're somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 hectares a year. At the moment, we're planting about 1,500 hectares a year in England, so the game really needs to be stepped up. But I think a critical point in this are the red words down at the bottom, that they need to be the right trees in the right place for the right reason, not just plastering trees for the sake of it. So that is important, and I think it drives how we need to model where the trees might be. And if the 25-year plan and the Clean Growth Strategy weren't enough, the net zero recommendations from the Committee on Climate Change, which are now in legislation, repeat the 30,000 hectares a year, allocates 10,000 hectares a year for England, and very keen on tree planting because it's the only mature technology for carbon reduction, i.e. negative emissions. So the tree planting is enough of an aspiration, and on top of that there is a requirement for carbon capture and storage requiring domestic biomass production of something like 165 terawatt hours. That's a lot of biomass. If it all came from forestry, which it won't, that's equivalent to 6 times current UK timber production. So there will be additional planting to help meet that requirement if we're going to achieve net zero. So need to bear that in mind. But as I say, that will come from a lot of other sources, not just forestry. I mentioned standards need to continue to apply, and for forestry that's the UK Forestry Standard for general forest practice, and you've got 7 underpinning guidelines: biodiversity, climate change, historic environment, landscape, people, soil and water. And all of those need to be complied with if you're going to put forward a woodland creation proposal above only 2 hectares, or if you want to seek any grant support from government. So these standards do need to be complied with, and they do ensure that woodland creation is sustainable. The asks from the 25-year Environment Plan, which we've already heard about from Ian, and I'm sure Ian will Ian Bateman will talk about them. The natural capital provided by woodland, soil protection, water protection, flood protection, air quality, habitat for wildlife, habitat for humans. A lot was made about peri-urban woodland and the contribution that woodland can make to air quality and health and well-being. Carbon at the moment is the main driver for woodland creation, but should not be the principal driver, if you follow me. We should be planting woodland for other reasons, and the carbon comes along as a co-benefit so that we get it in the right place. And also produce timber, fibre and energy. When we do design the woodlands, we've got to make sure that they can cope with the current and the future climate, because only habitat or deadwood habitat is provided by dead trees. So we do need to think carefully about what we plant in the future. When thinking about what to plant, it's on a landowner's land, and it has to meet their management objectives, which may well be timber production. But what we don't know is what timber markets will be in the 40 or 50 years hence, when those woodlands might start to be managed. We've got conventional construction, wood fire. We've already heard that CCS may be coming along. There may be a requirement for wood to go into aviation fuel. biorefineries replacing plastics. So we don't actually know what the wood is being grown for, but you do know that good silviculture is going to be important because that's going to reduce the harvesting costs in the future. So even though we don't know the markets, we know there will be markets, there will be big demand for wood, and good silviculture will be essential. Right, before we move on to where to plant woodlands, I think it's useful to identify where we probably shouldn't be planting woodlands, not least to comply with the UK Forestry standard. To try to help potential applicants for woodland creation grants, we have prepared a national map identifying areas where there are no known constraints at first sight from nationally available data sets. That's not all data sets, that's nationally available data sets. Firstly, we've excluded all the protected landscapes from those, and I'll go on to talk a little bit more about that. So AONBs and national parks have been excluded because it isn't low risk to put a new woodland into a protected landscape, but it doesn't mean that you can't plant there. Secondly, we have taken the local nature reserves, national nature reserves, Ramsar sites, scheduled monuments, sites of special scientific interest, the Broads and World Heritage Sites. They've all been excluded, they have statutory protection. We've also removed RSPB important bird areas. They obviously have biodiversity demands. Acid vulnerable catchments, so there is no contribution to acidification of watercourses. Common land, because separate legislature applies to that. Higher level stewardship agreements, because there is probably biodiversity interest on that land, and government has paid for that for measures. Removed the best and most versatile agricultural lands, so classes 1, 2 and 3A. Priority habitat, registered battlefields, registered parks and gardens and deep peat. So all of those have been removed from that map to try to guide landowners into appropriate locations to plant. It doesn't mean that you can't plant outside these areas. It's just whatever constraint is there will need to be taken into account. And that gives you something like 3.5 million hectares in England, taking all of those sensitivities out. And that's what it looks like in the on the ground in using our internet map browser. That happens to be a site in Leicestershire that I was visiting last week. As I say, it's important to interpret this map in the right way. Firstly, it was developed primarily to identify sensitivity to large-scale woodland creation, and if you're planting small areas of woodland, it's probably going to be a lot more feasible. It does not indicate a green light with low sensitive areas or a red light outside. Native woodland, broadleaf woodland may well have different requirements and may have a lot fewer sensitivities. Critical to point out that national maps do not cover a lot of the small scale or local sensitivities, and there are a lot of local data sets that when you consult over a woodland creation plan you will need to consider. And above all, and this is where national mapping becomes rather difficult, you're always going to need site-specific assessment and a good quality design plan, and that doesn't necessarily map well with trying to map where to plant the woodland at national scale. So that is certainly a challenge. Landscape is another challenge. We've already heard it's a bit of an intangible. What looks good in the landscape to you may look awful to me, and vice versa. So again, it has to come down to the individual woodland creation proposal, and very difficult to map beyond the protected landscapes. Natural England have published 169, I think, natural character area assessments, which gives an indication of the landscape, what needs protected and where there are opportunities for landscape improvement. A basic principle is well-wooded landscapes generally absorb woodland more easily than open landscapes, and a number of the NCAs say big open skies. That generally means woodland is not welcome in them. So when putting a proposal together, it's really important to consider the landscape character assessment and the national character area assessment as well. Priority habitat, you probably can't see this, there's about 360,000 hectares of priority habitat in England on which woodland could be established. The rest of the priority habitat is either too rocky, too salty or too wet. And so it's about 400,000 hectares. 360,000 are in those protected landscapes, with only about 43,000 hectares outside. Now, the fact that it is priority open ground habitat does not necessarily mean you can't plant on it, but a lot of sensitivities. It's most likely to be allowed if it is heavily degraded. You will have to maintain priority habitat, and that would require broadleaf woodland. Have to be very careful with the site preparation so that you don't damage any remnant vegetation. And it may be seen as positive if it results in the control of invasive species such as rhododendron. So an important issue that needs to be dealt with care. A rising area of concern are upland breeding bird populations, in particular curlew, because of their declining populations. And a general principle is above the moor line is or may be a habitat for curlew, on top of which there are mapped Natural England data sets relating to countryside stewardship which identify where there are populations of curlew. However, again, this requires a site-specific assessment because many sites are not appropriate for these populations. If there are trees around, electricity pylons around, if the vegetation is not right, and if there isn't surface water around in March and April, they're probably not suitable for curlew, so not a sensitivity to woodland creation. Converse is true. If those conditions are met, you're not likely to be able to get permission to plant because of the impact on those populations. And those are the maps in a bit more detail. Deep peat, we're quite clear, you can't plant on deep peat above 50 centimetres. Where we go with shallow peat is open to question, but deep peat is an absolute no-no. At the moment, restocking is allowed, but there should always be a deep consideration of whether the growth rates are fast enough to justify restocking of existing woodlands on deep peat. Very important to select the right species from the site, for the site, and make sure that it is going to thrive, particularly if carbon is going to be one of the principal reasons for planting the woodland. Match the species to what your objectives are. Are you planting for nature conservation? Are you planting for timber production? Are you planting for amenity? So that should be the first consideration. Then the soils. What constraints do the soils on the site represent? And what is going to be required to capture the site, to get the trees away and growing fast? We do have model ecological site classification that can be used to give a general indication of the suitability of 69 species, I think there are, for any site put in the grid reference. But don't believe it at first sight, because models are aren't always correct. And because you've got a 1 to 250,000 soil map that is telling you the suitability, I'm afraid you need to get out with a spade, dig a hole, and find out what the soil's really like. So again, we're coming down to site specifics that are going to be important. And that is a critical phase, because whatever you're planting, you're investing your time, your money now for 50, 100, 200 years' time. So absolutely crucial that is a consideration. Need to look at the agricultural land quality. That's going to tell you, how you could be using that land otherwise, what the likely value of the land is. So that should be a consideration when selecting a site for planting. Moving on to where will public benefits be, or could they be provided by woodland? I think an example of this is everyone mentions recreation and health and well-being, and I'm sure Ian will do as well. But you only get those benefits if there is public access to those woodlands. So any incentive schemes that is targeting those particular benefits is going to need to require public access to get them. The landowner may decide they don't want the public benefits for recreation. That's absolutely fine, but that does need to be a consideration. Fortunately, we've got lots of data sets that have been used in the targeting and scoring of countryside stewardship. On the left, those are the priority areas for woodland creation to meet water quality objectives. On the right, they're flood risk management objectives, so you've got high and medium priority for both of those. For biodiversity, you've got similar maps that we use for targeting and scoring, both for woodland priority habitat and also for specific species associated with woodland. Moving on to the peri-urban areas for the recreation, the health and the well-being, and indeed the air quality benefits. On the left-hand side, that is the priority places map that has been around since the English Woodland Grant Scheme was put in place, effectively putting a 4-kilometre buffer around centres of population. This has been honed a little bit further for the recently launched Urban Tree Challenge Fund to identify urban areas which have a deficit in tree cover or canopy cover. So that may be another way to look at where the benefits could be derived. Putting all of these together, the map on the left is a site of high priority targeting for woodland creation from countryside stewardship. And on the left-hand side, the right-hand side, we've got where different countryside stewardship benefits are stacked on top of each other. So it gives a slightly different picture, but is effectively reporting the same base data. On the left-hand side, we've got the low-risk map. The 3.5 million hectares. The blue is the low-risk area that I showed earlier on. However, in terms of looking for public benefit, it doesn't seem reasonable just to exclude all the national parks, all the AONBs, and all the ALC 3A land. So they have been included in the right-hand side, so we're using the low-risk map to say where damage is unlikely to be done, and therefore starts the process of identifying where might be a good location to plant the new woodland. So the right-hand side applies the rest of the constraints within those protected landscapes and also on that medium quality agricultural land. There are various valuations for public benefits that have been published associated with woodland. The brief analysis that I'm showing here has taken a very simplistic approach that assumes that as soon as a woodland is planted, then those benefits will arise. That's clearly not the case for many of the benefits, and a more complex analysis should be picking up the benefits after 20 years, but this isn't a time-based analysis. So those are the sort of figures that are around, and some of them are very high. The recreation, again, is a very high value. There are alternative values around, and again, the carbon sequestration is a high value. That's modelled over 50 years, And I put in 2 values there for more productive sites and less productive sites. As mapped here, the green is where the minimum growth rate requirements for the Woodland Carbon Fund, one of our grant schemes, where they are met, and the grey area where they're not met. Sorry about the quality of that. There are also white areas that you may be able to pick up as at London and Birmingham and the other conurbations. So we can apply a figure for the carbon sequestration as well in a very simplistic way. And if you stack the values for the various services on top of where those services are provided on the basis of the older countryside stewardship mapping, you get a map that looks remarkably similar to one from 2015 produced for the Natural Capital Committee. And it's picking up the benefits of peri-urban woodland for health and well-being, but also incorporating the water quality, the biodiversity, the flood risk management, and the carbon benefits. And you can take that one further and look at what the alternative land use would provide in terms of income, agricultural income or farm income, and you come up with a similar map. Important to look at the scales on these because I've been very careful that none of the maps have got the same colours. Keeps you on your toes. But if we look at the farm income, positive social benefit in the blue colours, small positive with the reds, and the yellows and the pinks, no social benefit from planting woodland because the existing modelled land use and land income outweighs the public benefit from planting woodland. So that's the theory. That's what you can do with available data sets, but it seems there are a lot of constraints in terms of planting, and ultimately government may decide where it would like to plant woodland, but government does not own the land. And we've been trying our best to get planting rates up, but I've said we're still at about 1,500 hectares a year. Farmers are farmers. They farm the land often for generations. They're not foresters. So persuading them to move to another land use that they're not familiar with is a huge ask, and that should not be underestimated. Not least because forestry doesn't have a nice annual income. You may get your first thinning after 30 years, it may be beyond that. If you do have a clear fell system, felling it at 50 years, that won't be you getting the income, so it really doesn't fit with an agricultural business model. So an incentive, we could call it profit, something is going to be needed to make a landowner change land use. And it's also got to be compatible with what they want to do with the land. Landowners are also generally highly conservative in terms of permanent land use change, and conversion to woodland is a permanent land use change, so that needs to be considered. As we've discovered, grant schemes take a minimum of 3 years to bed in. So continuity is absolutely essential in developing grant schemes and keeping them going. The regulatory framework, environmental impact assessment, to ensure that woodland creation is sustainable, is perceived by many as a huge barrier. There are some misconceptions. Some think an environmental statement will always be called in. I think only 10 have been called in the last decade. But there is a lot of process in terms of putting together a woodland creation plant and then applying for grant aid and going through the environmental impact assessment. So that is a barrier, but it's quite right that it's a barrier to ensure that land use change to woodland is fully sustainable. It's also baggage from the past. Some of our planting, particularly in the uplands, hasn't been greatly appreciated. Landscape design was non-existent. And that is in the memories of a lot of people, so there is that baggage. And there are also very different views across the woodland and forestry sector. You have the commercial forestry on one side, nature conservation on the other, and there's a lot in between. So, as I say, it has proved very challenging. This is woodland creation since 1971 in England. You can see the drop-off in conifer planting through the 80s and 90s. There's recently been a little bit of conifer planted in England, but we are still down at very low rates of woodland creation. It may well be that the new drive for net zero from the Clean Growth Strategy, 25-year environment plan, and planting the woodlands for a reason, not just for planting, hopefully will help us drive that forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was very interesting. We've got time for, well, does anyone have a few questions for Mark? A woman at the front here.
Hi, Martin Barron's, University of Warwick. I was interested that you're looking at this as an area by area basis, because I was thinking, well, actually, you maybe need to step back and think about a whole pattern as well, just as we saw with the urban thing. Because in terms of insect pollinators and other kind of wildlife, sometimes they need corridors, not just patches, in order to be able to thrive and to get that benefit.
That would be part of putting together a woodland creation design plan. We have had permission refused on the basis of some agricultural weeds, for example, so it isn't an easy process, and that sort of information would be picked up, and how you design it, the edges to the woodlands, so that you have got some scrub habitat too, which also helps blend it into the landscape. And how you use the open space within a woodland. You're likely to have 20% open space, and that shouldn't just be used as a track, or if there's a bit of deep peat on the site just left, that land should be used as part of an ecological framework. So there's a huge amount that can be done with woodland design.
This man at the front here.
John Pitchford from York. You showed brilliant spatial snapshots. You talked about the necessity to include time, so how do you build that into your assessment? By
using someone who can do the modelling, I would suggest. you can do it for one location. Yeah, it's easy enough with Excel to run it through on one location, looking at growth rates. But yes, the spatial context of that needs pulling into.
Are there any priorities within all those information where temporal information would help the most?
I guess one of the key areas is going to be air quality, because it's dynamic in terms of the pollutant concentrations. As those drop, the value of the woodland in terms of air quality uptake will go up, and that was certainly in the ONS pilot study, which did look at what the benefits would be in 2015, I think, and 2030. So where you have those dynamics, and the same may be true of water quality, particularly if we get changes in river flows as well. So the dynamic ones.
I think we have one more question. Let's take one more from Jaburi, and we'll leave it, I think, better go to the next.
Scotland has got an order of magnitude larger new planting than England does. Are there any lessons to take from Scotland, or are the two countries just so different?
They really are very different. There's a lot of less expensive, poor quality grazing land in Scotland, which is where much of the woodland is being planted. So yeah, don't try and compare the two.
Okay, I think we'd better go to the next talk. We're slightly behind the intro. Thank you very much, Mark.